We live on a human-dominated planet, putting unprecedented pressure on the systems on Earth. This is bad news, but perhaps surprising to you, it's also part of the good news. We're the first generation, thanks to science, to be informed that we may be undermining the stability and the ability of planet Earth to support human development as we know it. It's also good news because the planetary risks we're facing are so large that business as usual is not an option. In fact, we're in a phase where transformative change is necessary, which opens the window for innovation, for new ideas, and new paradigms. This is a scientific journey on the challenges facing humanity in the global phase of sustainability. On this journey, I'd like to bring, apart from yourselves, a good friend, a stakeholder who's always absent when we deal with the negotiations on environmental issues, a stakeholder who refuses to compromise: planet Earth. So I thought I'd bring her with me here today on stage to have her as a witness of a remarkable journey, which humbly reminds us of the period of grace we've had over the past 10,000 years. This is the living conditions on the planet over the last 100,000 years. It's a very important period. It's roughly half the period when we've been fully modern humans on the planet. We've had the same, roughly, abilities of developed civilizations as we know it. This is the environmental conditions on the planet, here used as a proxy temperature variability. It was a jumpy ride. 80,000 years back in a crisis, we leave Africa, we colonize Australia in another crisis 60,000 years back, we leave Asia for Europe in another crisis 40,000 years back, and then we enter the remarkably stable Holocene phase, the only period in the whole history of the planet that we know of that can support human development. 1,000 years into this period, we abandon our hunting and gathering patterns. We go from a couple of million people to the 7 billion people we are today. The Mesopotamian culture, we invent agriculture, we domesticate animals and plants. You have the Roman, the Greek, and the story as you know it. The only phase as we know it that can support humanity. The trouble is, we're putting a quadruple squeeze on this poor planet, a quadruple squeeze which, as its first squeeze, has population growth, of course. Now, this is not only about numbers. This is not only about the fact that we're 7 billion people committed to 9 billion people. It's an equity issue as well. The majority of the environmental impacts on the planet have been caused by the rich minority, the 20% that jumped onto the industrial bandwagon in the mid-18th century. The majority of the planet aspiring for development, having a right for development, are largely aspiring for an unsustainable lifestyle, a momentous pressure. The second pressure on the planet is, of course, the climate agenda, the big issue, where the policy interpretation of science is that it would be enough to stabilize greenhouse gases at 450 ppm to avoid average temperatures exceeding 2 degrees, to avoid the risk that we may be destabilizing the West Antarctic ice shelf, holding 6 meters level rise, the risk of destabilizing Greenland ice sheet, holding another 7 meters sea level rise. Now, you would have wished the climate pressure to hit a strong planet, a resilient planet. But unfortunately, the third pressure is the ecosystem decline. Never have we seen over the past 50 years such a sharp decline of ecosystem functions and services on the planet. One of them being the ability to regulate climate on the long term in our forest, land, and biodiversity. The fourth pressure is surprise. The notion and the evidence that we need to abandon our old paradigm that ecosystems behave linearly, predictably, controllably in our, so to say, linear systems, and that in fact surprise is universal, that systems tip over very rapidly, abruptly, and often irreversibly. This, dear friends, poses a human pressure on the planet of momentous scale. We may in fact have entered a new geological era, the Anthropocene, where humans are the predominant driver of change at a planetary level. Now, as a scientist, what's the evidence for this? Well, the evidence is unfortunately ample. It's not only carbon dioxide that has this hockey stick pattern of accelerated change. You can take virtually any parameter that matters for human well-being: nitrous oxide, methane, deforestation, overfishing, land degradation, loss of species. They all show the same pattern over the past 200 years. Simultaneously, they branch off in the mid-50s, 10 years after the Second World War, showing very clearly that the great acceleration of the human enterprise starts in the mid-50s. We see for the first time an imprint at the global level, And I can tell you, you enter the disciplinary research in each of these, you find something remarkably important, the conclusion that we may have come to a point where we have to bend the curves. That we may have entered the most challenging and most exciting decade in the history of humanity on the planet, the decade when we have to bend the curves. Now, as if this was not enough to just bend the curves and understanding the accelerated pressure on the planet, we also have to recognize the fact that systems do have multiple stable states, separated by thresholds, illustrated here by this ball and cup diagram, where the depth of the cup is the resilience of the system. Now, the system may gradually, or under the pressure of climate change, erosion, biodiversity loss, lose the depth of the cup, the resilience, but appear to be healthy, and appear to suddenly, under a threshold, be tipping over, changing state, and literally ending up in an undesired situation.